sophist. And sophist can literally be translated wise guys. I'm sure it's coming from the root word Sophia, which means wisdom. So sophists maybe nobly could say they're lovers of wisdom, but that's really not what they were about. They really were agnostic when it came to the truth. Like I'm talking capital T truth, objective reality, universals. And it's hard to blame them. Seeing all these different guys we've talked about, we had Thales with water, Anaximander with the indeterminate, Anaximenes with air, Heraclitus with fire, and then we get the pluralists combining the elements together, and even the atomists talking about it's not just four, there's like all these different eternal, indestructible particles that keep being broken down and rearranged over and over again. And so by the time we get to the 5th century in Athens, people have kind of given up on humans being able to know truth. So they become agnostic about the truth. And hence we get the term skeptic, which we still use that word today, right? To talk about a disbelief. And so skepticism was alive and well in 5th century Athens, along with another group called the Cynics. So the skeptics and cynics were actually different schools of philosophy. The Sophists were specialists in rhetoric, and rhetoric is the art of speaking or debate, persuasive speaking. And I believe it's still like the #1 major at schools like UC Berkeley and others. A lot of people going into law or politics will major in rhetoric. And it's like the art of debating. And what these, I love the cartoon Palmer has here. Here you got the sophist in a wagon, and on the side of the wagon it says snake oil salesman. And that's kind of like what these guys were, but not with cures and ointments, but with ideas and concepts. And so they would travel from town to town, and they would put on demonstrations of their skill set. So they could say, pick any topic under the sun. It could be religious, it could be political, it could be social. And first they would debate one side of it as convincingly and persuasively as possible. And then they would step back and turn the other way. And then they would argue just as passionately, just as persuasively from the other point of view. And so what they were teaching, what they were offering their students was basically a degree in rhetoric or debate. And this was very important in Athens because Athens was a very litigious society, but they didn't have professional lawyers. So these leading families, it was very important to have at least one member or to train up your children in the art of sophistry or rhetoric so that they could defend your interests in the public square if push came to shove with some of your other citizens. And so that's kind of the world that we've entered into. Now, one of the guys at this time period who deserves his own shout out is Protagoras. And the commentator Palmer says, perhaps the most famous and least cynical of the sophists was Protagoras. And his dates are 490 to 422. And he taught that the way to achieve success was through a careful and prudent acceptance of traditional customs, not because they were true, but because an understanding and manipulation of them is expedient. Basically, what he's putting forth is human subjectivity and relativity. And his big claim to fame was his statement, homo mensura, which means man is the measure, or man is the measure of all things. And he took this so far as to say, even the gods, the Greek gods, are made in the image of man. Do you see how it takes like the Hebrew Genesis account and flips it on its head? Where Genesis tells us man was made in the image and likeness of God, the Greeks, at least Protagoras, is saying, no, we made the gods in our image. And when you look at the Greek gods, that's exactly what they are, right? They're like personifications of human traits and qualities into the heavens. They're just bigger, badder, tougher versions of humans. They have the same foibles, the same virtues, the same flaws on a grander divine scale. But the Greek gods are very anthropomorphic, most of them. And remember, that term means attributing human qualities or traits to non-human things. Man is the measure of all things. I mean, that's intense to think about, but it is kind of like how we are in our modern society. It's like we've kind of gone full circle all the way back to the ancient Greek materialist with this idea that we may not be able to know if there's a god or gods or not, but we can look around, and since humans are the highest form of living being on the planet, at least that we're aware of, well, we should be the ones that get to say what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. Those are coming from human value judgments and perspectives. And so that's Protagoras. Man is the measure of all things. And this really highlighted, since we can't know absolute truth, well, then you better be able to make your version of truth better than the next guy's. So that's where we're at in Greek society and culture with the Sophists. Philosophers of the 19th, 20th century was called Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein basically came to the conclusion that we do not have the language to do philosophy. And this is like 2,000 years later, 2,500 years later, we have philosophers still wrestling with this idea that even if we could think in these terms, we don't have the human words or language to properly conceive of it, let alone express it to others.
Okay, so like, is like the absolute truth that they're talking about, or like the underlying?
Yeah, they do not believe we can know absolute truth. That the Sophists just believe, since we can't know it, then we need to become experts at telling our truth, little t truth. And we need to try to convince others that our little t truth is the big T truth that other people should follow. But they were very cynical and skeptical about truth being knowable. They didn't think humans could know truth. Kind of similar to our postmodern times we're living in, right? These are pre-moderns, these are ancients, but they are wrestling with a lot of the same issues. What is truth? How can we know it? And if we can't know it, then what should we put our interest in? How about you, Autumn? Do you have any absolute truths in your back pocket?
Like the only absolute truths I can think of are ones that don't come from me. Like they come from God.
Like what?
Yeah, see, that's hard to just...
Well, give me an absolute truth you believe comes from God.
Well, like, I would say in the 10 Commandments, but yeah, those seem like pretty absolute.
Really?
Or like the fact that like God is good. Or like God is just. I feel like characteristics of God are absolute truths.
And do
like,
you think goodness is absolute, or do you think that's relative?
Well,
like,
I guess
what may be good for me might not be so good for you. Or am I not using the word good correctly?
Well, but it's not relative to me. But that's just completely different than what they think.
Do you think you know what good is?
Not like in its purest form.
Okay, and that's kind of where the Sophists are at. It's like, if
Yeah.
we can't know, then it's just kind of opinion. And if it's just about opinion and taste or preference, well, let's get really good at persuading other people that our opinion is the right one, since it's really just boils down to a battle of opinions. And everyone's got their own, but if we can get a group of people on board with the same opinion, that might be worth something. And so that is what they were offering, the skill set, how to persuade others that your point of view is the right one, even though they in no way are pretending that they believe in an absolute truth, capital T truth.